All right, man, peace. So, superstar cornerback Richard Sherman first entered the national sports consciousness as a member of the Legion of Boom in 2012 when he had a game against the New England Patriots in which, in the aftermath of a Seattle Seahawks victory, he asked Tom Brady if he was mad. His play only elevated along with the play of his team, eventually resulting in a Super Bowl victory over the Denver Broncos, and then the next season, a very ignominious performance against the New England Patriots, which changed the course of the Seattle Seahawks franchise forever. It eventually led to many of the more prominent members of their defense jumping down the woke rabbit hole in an attempt to antagonize Pete Carroll, the liberal Caucasian coach of the football team, which itself eventually led to both Richard Sherman and Michael Bennett being jettisoned away from the team. And this led to Richard Sherman negotiating his own contract with the San Francisco 49ers, which has led to some debate amongst the national sports media. Of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
Sports Center right now, I'm Antonieta Collins. Richard Sherman is officially a 49er. The veteran cornerback talked about it all during his introductory press conference, including his contract. His deal wasn't just unconventional because he decided to play with his former team's rival, but because Sherman, not an agent, negotiated his own contract.
It was really important to me. I think that a lot of times in our league, there are players that have the ability to do that and have the ability to structure their own deals and really take advantage of just being in control of their own destiny.
Absolutely. And let me say this very quickly before Richard continues. This is the difference between having a ruling class mentality and having a slave mentality. You're not a slave because you have an agent, but you do have a slave mentality if you're able to negotiate your own deal, but you're scared to do so, when you know full well that you have the intellectual capacity and the wherewithal to do so. There's nothing wrong with someone being the executor over their own estate if they have the wherewithal to do so. Now, if you're not motivated to do it, don't do it just for the sake of acting like you're somebody that you're not. But if you choose to do so and you want to do so and you want to be in control of your own life and over your own finances, then yeah, why not? The real issue is, as I touched on in the previous video, there is a convention that is set up, a dynamic that has been created where the agents act as intermediaries between the athletes and the owners. The owners don't want to have to look athletes dead in their face and tell them how they feel. Or I should say the general managers, because for the most part, you're not going to be negotiating directly with owners. Some people may, but for the most part, it will be the GM. And many of them are unaccustomed to having to deal directly with players. Please also understand, as I touched on in the previous video, that many of these agents are working hand in hand with the general managers and the owners in a quid pro quo fashion. In other words, what? I'm going to help you get my client signed as long as you assist me in getting another one of my clients signed. If you don't want to help me in this way, then I'm going to advise my client to go to another team. These are many of the type of things that go on behind the scenes that fans may not be aware of, that Richard Sherman alluded to in his statements. And it's just very interesting how everyone is attacking him, a cornerback coming off of 2 Achilles tendon surgeries. He's a cornerback coming off of 2 Achilles tendon surgeries, and he was able to negotiate his own deal where if he meets a series of conditions, he could be making $13 million a year. I think he signed a great contract, not a good one, a great one, particularly since he is the captain of his own ship, and that's worth its weight in gold sometimes.
Sometimes these agents, they're great agents in our game that take care of their players, make sure that our players are ready for life after football, their finances, whatever the case may be. And then there are some agents who negotiate a deal in 2006 and don't talk to their client again until 2010, or whatever the case may be. And that's the things that we're trying to avoid, and I'm trying to avoid.
For more on Sherman, here's First Take. Richard.
And beyond that, all these high-level athletes should understand how to be the fiduciaries over their finances. You should be constantly trying to work on that. Learn how to deal with the minutia of numbers, because that is your future. That is your family's future. Why would you want to have another man being the person in charge over your family's financial future if you can help it? Now, of course, when you get into an affluent position like a professional athlete or entertainer, you may not have the time or the wherewithal. So that's why you may hire someone, but you constantly have to watch that person. So if you have the wherewithal, why not just do it yourself? It's not that big a deal.
Richard Sherman looking good in the red, negotiating his own deal with the Niners without using an agent. Very interesting. Ryan Clark in the house, fresh cut.
Yeah, thank God this brother finally got a decent haircut and stopped trying to look like one of these 21-year-olds at a damn Migos concert. Thank goodness. It's like, brother, come on, you're 39, 40 years old, however old you are. You know, get a haircut like a grown man and stop running around trying to look like a rooster.
Right. Let's get into it. Max, did he do the right thing, Sherman, in negotiating his own deal?
Before Max answers, let me say, yes, he did do the right thing because he did the right thing for him, and that's all that matters. That's all that matters. The media is trying to make this conversation into what should all players do because they're worried that he's going to alter the paradigm and that the so-called black man will actually look at himself as an asset to himself as opposed to just being an asset to a corporation, a.k.a. a team.
Depends if you think the most important thing is making money or if you define your happiness another way. Now, part of what Richard Sherman says I think is true and I agree with him about. Number one, some agents are good, some agents aren't good. You know, you can put anyone on a bell curve, any population on a bell curve, and some are on the far right-hand side, and you go, boy, they're good at what they do, and others are on the far left-hand side, they're bad, and most of them are in the middle somewhere. My assumption is the person that Richard Sherman, Stanford educated, would select to represent him would be one of the good ones. Because Richard Sherman's smart and savvy.
And maybe he's so smart and savvy that he decides that he does not need a third party to be the commander over his financial future. And please understand that what's right for you may not always appear to be what's right to everybody else. You may be walking down the street with your lady, and your lady has been with you hard body for 5, 6, 7 years. And to the outside world, she might not be a quote-unquote dime piece. There may be quote-unquote dime pieces walking past you that are looking you up and down and saying, why are you with that person? But they don't understand what that person, your significant other, brings to the table. That person has been with you through thick and through thin. So in other words, what? She may not be right for the outside world, but she's right for you. That's what matters. And people spend so much time worrying about what the outside world is going to think and being validated by them. And that is not what leads to you living a fulfilling life. You have to always audit and scrutinize yourself and your own decisions and understand why you're doing what you're doing. Because 99.9% of these other people, these outside people, do not matter. They're not relevant.
But I don't know that this was the savvy move if his intention was to extract the most money out of the process. Mike Florio has pointed out that a qualified agent with years of experience likely would have gotten Richard Sherman more money. And I agree with that. But in order to...
Well, he can say that a qualified agent would have, quote unquote, likely gotten Richard Sherman more guaranteed money. But he may not have gotten him more money once all the incentives are reached. Because please understand that Richard Sherman is betting on himself. And as I already touched on in the previous video, Richard Sherman understands that he could retire from football tomorrow and get a job on ESPN or Fox Sports 1 talking about football. He knows that for a fact, and he knows that most likely he can cause the bidding war between those two networks that will lead him to making 7 figures as an announcer.
To get more money, you have to find other bidders. You have to test the market. And that likely would have driven San Francisco's price up. But to do that, you have to be willing to walk away from your preferred destination. And if Richard Sherman wants to sit there and say, nope, I wanted to play for Shanahan. I liked what he had to say, which he said in the Players Tribune. He wrote in the Players Tribune. I like what he had to say. That's where I wanted to be. And I didn't want to risk blowing it over a few dollars. Maybe even a few $1 million. Richard Sherman's already a rich guy, and if he performs up to his standards, he'll make millions. That is true. But that's really what he's saying. Not, hey, I negotiated the most money that could be extracted, but I negotiated a situation for myself where I think I'll be happy if I perform. His arguments are, it's good for me and it's good for the team. That's not what the agent's concerned with. The agent doesn't care about the team. The agent cares about you.
That's a lie, sir. That is a lie. That's why I must stop you. The agent is not concerned about you. The agent is concerned about himself. The reason why agents try to refer you to what they let you believe is the most lucrative situation is because they're going to get a portion of that contract. So oftentimes an agent will talk a player out of being with a team that is actually more suitable for him because he has a better relationship with another team's general manager or owner, and he will make the player believe that the contractual situation will be better with a new team, but it will really just be better for him because he has a working relationship with another team's owner or GM. People have to understand that everything in life, especially in the business world, is about relationships. It's about relationships. It's always about quid pro quo. So once Richard Sherman decided to be the captain of his own ship and he took out the middleman, now the framework that supports the agents is going to attack Richard Sherman through the media, because many of these more prominent media members are controlled by agents as well. Some of them even have the same agents as you see in the sports world.
Are you getting the best financial deal you can? Because that's how the agent makes a living. Richard Sherman, what he's really saying here, whether he intends to or not, is that's not the only way I define my own happiness. And if that's the case, then fine. But if we're talking about bottom line dollars, he likely left some on the table by not getting an agent.
You don't know that, sir. You would have to have checked the landscape and verified that there were other teams that were offering him more money. So your argument is based off of pure speculation.
I'm conflicted here. And the reason I'm conflicted...
You're obviously conflicted just looking at your outfit. You look like one of them villains in the Dick Tracy movie with Warren Beatty.
Conflicted is...
Yeah, Shay. Yeah, copper.
It is because I'm usually of the mindset that you can be too smart for your own good. That
sometimes you can. Sometimes you can. But other times your intellect can lead you to make brave decisions that other people are too scared to make, because you're worried about stepping outside of the quote-unquote matrix. Right? The jail cell is open. Like there was a great scene in the film Rise of the Planet of the Apes when Caesar opened the gate, or he opened the prison cell of the gorilla, and even though the prison cell was open, the gorilla still would not step outside of that boundary. Sometimes you need people like Richard Sherman to show you that it's okay. You can dip your toe into the jacuzzi. The water's not too hot.
That knowing so much, putting yourself in a position where you're at the negotiating table, it could ultimately hurt you. Agents, even though all of them can't be trusted, and a lot of them are, particularly when they have a plethora of clients, may not be exercising your best interest. They may be exercising somebody else's, or you never know what kind of relationships they have with.
Absolutely. There's a reason why they use the term agent. They have an agenda. Oftentimes, agents are not just agents for you. They're agents for other people. When I say other people, I mean franchise as well. They're working as double agents.
With the team and how that can convolute or compromise rather them, serving your agenda to the nth degree. I'm of the mindset that you're usually best having a big-time agent, a qualified agent that knows what the hell they're doing, and more importantly, care about you and care about themselves and their own ego enough where they're going to...
That's difficult to find. Let me also state that, please remember that Richard Sherman, I mentioned this in the previous video, he attended college at Stanford, where he played for MK handler Jim Harbaugh. So he is a little bit closer to that environment. He's also from the LA area, so he's closer to that environment as well. So we'll see if there are any additional dynamics which may provide some reasoning as to why Richard Sherman chose to sign with the San Francisco 49ers.
They're going to get the absolute best deal possible for you come hell or high water. Having said that, I do think there are aberrations that exist, and I think that Richard Sherman has the potential to be that individual. There is no doubt that he could have gotten more money. There is no question about that. There is no doubt that this is
more guaranteed money, maybe.
A deal favorable to the San Francisco 49ers as opposed to him. But what stood out in my mind wasn't the two.
The deal is favorable to the San Francisco 49ers because they're a young fledgling franchise with a former superstar cornerback with an incentive-laden contract. So you know that you're not going to get any dogging from him. You know that you're most likely not going to get any incendiary blow-ups on the sideline from him because he has to make sure that he gets all his money. So it really works out for both parties because Richard is going to be extremely focused, and the Niners will know that they're going to get 100% from him, which he always shows anyway. Richard is way too prideful to ever dog it. He has been, at least from a statistical perspective, the best cornerback in the NFL for the past 7 years.
$2 million base salary, or another $3 million. Once you pass your physical, you will have had the $5 million, the incentive-laden contract that could pump it up to $13 million. That all sounds fine, even though the likelihood is that he could have gotten something more from an agent, with an agent in tow. But I will say this: what stands out in my mind is he talked about being in that Bay Area, how happy he was to be there. This is where he went to school in Stanford.
Absolutely. Ding.
He wanted to be in that locale. And if you want to be in that locale, and that's the decision that you're making, then you're making a quality of life decision, and you're basically betting on yourself. So again, I can't knock it. Now, if he was out there negotiating with a bunch of teams, and this is the deal he came home with, that would be different. But he basically took a flight after minutes after being let go. He got a call from San Francisco, went out there to meet with Kyle Shanahan, knew that he wanted to be out there, and he's talking about a quality of life decision. I can't knock him for that.
Beyond that, Richard Sherman has such a high football IQ, football acumen, that he could easily make the transition to safety and be just as potent on the defensive end as he was at cornerback. So I'm pretty sure that San Francisco is looking at it in that manner. Remember, John Lynch, their GM, is a potential Hall of Fame safety, if he's not in already. I can't remember if he's in already. I'm sure that he will be in eventually. One of you brothers can correct me on that if he's already in the Hall of Fame. But I remember him during his time period with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and he was one of the most hard-hitting safeties I could remember.
See, man, like, this is kind of, for me, I'm not on the fence at all. I'm not torn. I think this is a great decision by Richard Sherman.
Absolutely.
Because this decision, though it's about Richard Sherman in this place, it's about so much more. You heard Max talk about him being a very intelligent guy, being a savvy person. This is a guy that's on the executive committee with the NFLPA. For so many years, they've talked about helping guys with deals. If you do a deal, that deal has to be passed through them. Richard say he went to the NFLPA database and looked at contracts. He looked at wording. Richard Sherman's negotiating this deal, and you heard John Lynch this morning on Wingo and Golick walking outside, talking to other teams. This is where he wanted to be. You spoke about the $5 million he'll get guaranteed if he passes the physical before November 11th. And it is an incentive-laden contract. But let's think about other deals that people do. Joe Thomas says that he got crushed in this deal because he did it himself.
Yes, I already mentioned that in my previous video. Joe Thomas is obviously acting as an agent for the agents. Brothers, always be very wary and always investigate when someone decides that they want to make a statement to come against another player negotiating his own contract or taking control of his own financial responsibilities. It's very clear that Joe Thomas has some form of incentive himself to speak that way. And as I already stated, it's obvious to me that he's going to pop up on ESPN or Fox Sports 1 in the near future as an analyst. And that was his first attempt at a hot take. Really just someone who had a battery put in their back. I don't understand how you could be a grown man and talk about how someone decided to negotiate their own financial future, and you're talking about how they got taken to the back shed and got done wrong or done dirty, or their contract is not as optimal as it could possibly be. How would you know that? How would you know that? Because he left a quote-unquote couple of dollars on the table. Well, is anybody talking about how Drew Brees may have left a couple of dollars on the table to stay with New Orleans?
Is anybody attacking Nigel Bradham's agent, who essentially signed a 1-year, $6 million deal with team options for 4 years and $34 million after that? And though the contract as a whole, it looks big and looks like he has all of these things, but the part that he's getting is $6 million. He's the best linebacker on that team. So when you look at Richard Sherman and making a decision, I've been on the other side of the phone from agents where you have to pick out, is my agent telling me the truth?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because your agent is thinking about himself and his future rapport. Remember, these agents have to make sure that they can negotiate with the 30 NFL teams over the course of the rest of their life. They're going to be agents for their entire life. They're only going to have you as a quote-unquote contractor that they have to report to for a certain time period. Many of these athletes are only going to be in professional sports for 3 or 4 years. You're going to have a select few who are able to last in their respective sports leagues for 10 plus years. So they're more concerned about their rapport with these franchises, with the GMs, with the owners than they are with you, believe it or not.
What are these other teams telling him? What deal is on the table for me elsewhere?
I have a problem.
Go ahead.
I have a problem with that line of reasoning from Richard Sherman only because I'm not saying these aren't real points, and they're valuable points to get out there. And if Richard Sherman wants to lead by example, and that's one of the reasons he's doing this, or wants to make this point publicly, or even just have the experience of negotiating for himself, those are all valid reasons. But two things I don't like. One is he says some agents aren't good and you can't trust them and they're not worth the money, essentially. And the other is, I'm getting a better deal than I had. Both those points seem to me to be beside the point, to be points that aren't germane to really what this is about. Were Richard, in other words, like it almost sounds like he's embarrassed he didn't get a better deal. Were Richard Sherman to come out and the headline from him was, look, I got the best deal I could get, or the best deal that was gettable from the team I wanted to be on without risking not being on that team, I'm with him. That's a great point. He didn't want to risk not being on the Niners, given that circumstance. An agent wasn't going to do any better because to do better, you have to risk walking. He didn't want to risk it. He did it himself, and now he wants to show by example. Not all agents are. That's all fine. But when you come out and say, hey, I got a better deal than I had, yeah, okay, we understand that. That's not the argument. The argument is you could have had an even better deal.
That's not the argument. That's the speculation. That's not the argument. That's the speculation. In order for that to be the argument, you would need to have an actual agent call you up and tell you, I negotiated a deal for Richard with the 49ers that would have been more lucrative for him, but he turned it down because he wanted to act as his own representation. That's the only way that you could state that as fact, Max Kellerman. Right now, what you're presenting is speculation.
Some agents aren't good. That's not the argument. The argument is other agents are good.
There's often better deals. For me, the contract numbers would have been a better deal for me to go to Miami instead of staying in Pittsburgh for my last contract with them. But it was better for my life. I was going to be on a better team, and it was guaranteed to me that I was going to be with that team through that contract. I made that decision with an agent. In the end, you make your decision.
Absolutely.
Richard Sherman had the opportunity while in with John Lynch to walk out on the balcony and talk to other teams. Not a middleman, not somebody that was negotiating for him. He was getting to hear the bottom line numbers and what people were willing to do for him. So when he looked at the deal holistically, he felt like this was a better place and a better deal. If you're thinking it's all about millions, then you're not.
Let Ryan finish because he's the only one on the panel that knows what he's talking about, Steve. All you have is a question.
I got to ask you a question. That's why I'm interrupting. I want to ask you a question. Do you believe Richard Sherman could have gotten a better deal from San Francisco?
Do I believe he could have gotten a better deal?
A better deal from San Francisco?
Maybe so. I can't.
Yeah, but you know what? That if you were in a court, that question would not be relevant. Because the only way that you could actually validate or verify if he could have gotten a better deal from San Francisco if you were in on the contractual talks between those two. And nobody knows that. That's just speculation. That, once again, it's like when somebody marries someone else, right? You're with a woman and one of your loved ones tells you, well, I think that you could do better. I think you could have done better. Well, you think that your son or your daughter could have done better according to what your standards are for a mate. But according to what their standards are, clearly that person must be sufficing in some way. So that's really not pertinent. That's not relevant.
I can't say that he could have. I can't say when they're sitting here trying to hammer out the deal, they aren't giving him the real deal numbers or the numbers that he wants. I think the problem is we're looking at this in one way. Could he have gotten more money?
Absolutely.
Could he have been guaranteed more, whether it's from San Francisco, whether it's from a different team? That's not all that matters. When you've already signed a $40 million deal, when you've played in Seattle for your whole career, when there's a place that you want to be, a coach that you believe in, it's not about setting numbers that are astronomical.
And all of that, once again, that's just pure guesstimation, speculation. because that's all the media has to grasp onto in an attempt to attack the fact that Richard Sherman decided that he was going to cut out the middleman and destroy the paradigm that has been established, particularly for so-called black athletes, on how they're going to accrue their money. See, they don't want the so-called black man, particularly so-called black athlete, so-called black man, to act as an executor over what is his. They don't want you to have the mindset of ownership. That's why they tell you that your woman is not your woman. That's a partner. That's not your woman. Your kids are not really yours. Your kids belong to the state. I mean, of course, I'm taking this topic and just extending it to other circumstances, but that's the basic mindset. And this is why Richard Sherman is being attacked.
Every deal doesn't have to be the Kirk Cousins deal.
We agree with that. We agree with that. But what I'm trying to say is that for the purposes of this discussion, because Richard Sherman's cool no matter what, he agreed to what he agreed to, and we understand that, we respect his decision. What I'm saying is, for the purposes of this discussion, if he could have gotten more from the same exact team that he clearly wants to play for and with, then when do we get to define whether or not it was a good deal or a bad deal? Because you do have agents.
The only way that you could, once again, the only way that you can define whether or not the deal was a good deal or a bad deal based on the hypothetical question that both you and Max Kellerman are asking is if you had an agent or a former agent that was associated with Richard Sherman and was in on the contractual talks tell you, well, I could have got him a better deal. As a matter of fact, I had a better deal for him. And of course, that doesn't exist. So the topic is moot. The conversation is moot. Who are you to tell Richard Sherman that he got shorted? Obviously, he's fine with it. Once again, everybody does not have to walk down the street with a so-called dime. Most of these so-called dimes are just like actual dimes. They have been passed off from hand to hand. It's the same thing with this issue with Mr. Richard Sherman. He's doing what's best for him. It's really not, I mean, whenever I see this type of issue crop up, it's very obvious to me that it's always a subconscious problem that people have with the phenomena of a so-called black man deciding that I'm intelligent enough to represent myself.
You have players from the association. Oh, listen.
Thank you, Ryan Clark. Thank you, sir.
Listen, you do have players and you do have an association that'll look at that and says, particularly with the NFL, you always have to be concerned about precedent. I applaud the decision, but precedent does matter
real quick. I don't
what
think
kind of impact it can have on other players.
I think the point is he couldn't have gotten a better deal without risking not being on the Niners. And if that were his message, I'd be good with it. That's the team I wanted to play for. Getting a few extra dollars wasn't worth the risk of not being on that team, because you got to test the market to get the money.
Max Kellerman is the king of fictitious arguments. This man is the king of fictitious arguments. How would you know that he did not get the best deal? Do you have any verification or empirical information that states that other teams were offering him bigger contracts and he turned them down to sign with the Niners? If you don't have that, then you cannot substantiate this red herring that Richard Sherman decided to sign with the San Francisco 49ers for the love that he had for San Francisco. Maybe he did, but you just can't come on TV and say that without any substantiation. But that's what we have here in the era of sports talk panels where people don't do any real reporting or investigation anymore.
Listen, at the end of the day, he likes it. I love it.
I like that. You summed it up, Molly. You summed it up. The segment could have been 2 seconds. We could have just left it at what you... Good for Mr. Richard Sherman. Hopefully everything works out well for him in San Francisco. Peace.